Well, to look at this week's big developments on the COVID-19 front and in federal politics, I'm joined now by Kady O'Malley. She's a veteran chronicler of Ottawa politics and a contributor to iPolitics. And Niigaan Sinclair is a writer and a columnist for the Winnipeg Free Press. Both of you, welcome. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having us.
Hello.
Okay, well, let's start with Kady. I want to start just briefly with you because this is something that has gotten a few noses out of joint in the Ottawa press community, and that is that for all week long we've been asking the Prime Minister whether he's going to be in person attending the G7 summit in Cornwall, England. Until Thursday, he was saying that no decision had been made, but then eyebrows were raised when the readout from a discussion he had with the UK Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, said that Boris Johnson had confirmed that the Prime Minister would be attending in person. What do you make of that?
And yeah, it doesn't actually surprise me that that is the decision he went with. My suspicion, my hunch is that they were maybe trying to delay as long as possible saying either way, because as we have learned throughout the course of this pandemic, situations can change really quickly, which means, things look like they're going pretty well in the UK right now. Things look like they're going, better than they were in Canada in terms of falling case counts and vaccination rollout. At the same time, there is always that possibility. At this point, I would even say, even though I'm sure right now the Prime Minister is planning on going, if things were to change in the next week and a half, you could see him, change to pull that back and decide not to go. So in a way, I can understand why he wanted to leave it as long as possible before announcing one way or another whether he was going to go. But yeah, it probably wouldn't have been a terrible idea to maybe put out a statement himself, even in, an hour or two before the readout was going to come out, just so, we found out from our own Prime Minister and not by someone else.
Okay, I want to get to something else, which is to say the best, it's a strange story. Liberal MP William Amos from just across the border in Quebec, he's now been involved in a second incident for a second time, the internal feed, the Zoom feed of the parliamentary network, a second incident where he has exposed himself. A few months ago, he was changing in his office after jogging. This time it was urinating into a coffee cup during a late night debate on Wednesday. He has apologized for the second incident. He brought it to light through a tweet. He says he's stepping down as a parliamentary secretary to seek help. And the story has taken on another twist in that the Conservative Deputy House Leader, Karen Vecchio, has now issued an official press release saying that the Conservatives say that this proves that the Liberals cannot ensure a safe working environment in Parliament. Kady, what do you make of it all?
So I tend to take the view that just because the Conservatives put out a press release does not make something a story when it wouldn't otherwise have been. So I'm kind of, rolling my eyes a little bit at this only because I'm not sure what exactly is the remedy that Karen Vecchio would want the Prime Minister or the Liberal Party to take. I mean, are they suggesting that he's actually a menace? Should he? I mean, he wasn't even in the House of Commons. That was perhaps part of the problem here, is that he was in his office on a webcam and apparently not aware that, images go both ways in this particular incident. So, yeah, to me, it really feels like kind of a cheap drive-by smear. That said, it does seem as though there's something odd going on here, because I have to say, if I were an MP who had found myself inadvertently, flashing the House of Commons and my image in that story going around the world, I got to tell you, I would be pretty darn careful in future about exactly how I conducted myself when I was anywhere near my webcam. So I don't know. It really does seem like there might be more to this story, but I feel like the Conservatives are kind of just taking advantage of it to get a few cheap headlines.
Okay, Niigaan, and with the proviso that we really don't know all of the background to this story, what do you make of it?
The best part about this story is that you didn't start with me on commenting. What I would say is someone's obviously got to teach William Amos that the turn camera off function. I don't think anyone would penalize a sitting member for going to the bathroom and changing, and so clearly there's something else going on here in terms of decency, in terms of normalcy or protocols within the House, and particularly there's a real concern here that if the Conservatives want to get attention from this, it's at the behest of talking about people who don't understand technology or perhaps something else going on in terms of mental health, and certainly they have their own worries in order to get their own house in order than bigger issues involving this. I don't see this story going beyond the 24-hour cycle.
Okay, well, we'll see. Okay, I want to thank you on that. Let's get to the weighty issue of COVID-19. This was a week where we saw all of the provinces, except for, I think, 2 or 3, most of the provinces unveiling their reopening plans. Some of them are quite extensive, like in British Columbia and Alberta. And in Alberta, for example, Premier Kenney has said that if all goes well, almost all public health restrictions will be lifted by July. Meanwhile, in Ontario, we have Premier Ford still agonizing over whether or not to open schools. Reflections on the reopening and the pandemic. Kady.
Well, I feel like we've almost got a Goldilocks situation here in the sense that I gotta say, if I were Alberta Premier Jason Kenney, I would be staying up at night hoping that the numbers were going to work out and the vaccination rollout was going to be sufficiently robust. And his scenario kind of relies on everything working perfectly. If even one thing, say there's a sudden delay in vaccines, say there's an outbreak somewhere that requires another lockdown because the counts are going up, you don't want to raise expectations. And I think that that's actually what you're seeing coming from the Ontario Premier, Doug Ford, who is, I think he's been burned before by reopening or promising reopening before it was really safe and having to walk back, a promise which gets people more disappointed than had you not promised it in the first place. So I do wonder if he's being more cautious than would normally or even be necessary simply because he doesn't want to get into a situation where he opens up and then has to close back down. Whereas on the other side in Alberta, you have Jason Kenney, who just seems to be done with this whole pandemic thing. And as far as he's concerned, magical thinking is going to allow his province to be open for Stampede, which I believe even the Stampede organizers were kind of taken aback to learn that they would possibly be going ahead as scheduled.
Niigaan, you are in Winnipeg, obviously, Manitoba. There in Manitoba, reopening is probably the last thing on Premier Palliser's mind right now.
I don't know what you're talking about. You're all just talking a language I don't know anything about. We've been on lockdown for about a week now. My daughter's been homeschooled, and we're remote learning. We were just announced in the New York Times as being one of the worst hotspots in North America. And we've got a bungling premier that is battling every day, calling the leader of the opposition swear words in Parliament, coming out and announcing restrictions, making these big announcements saying we're going to announce huge restrictions, and then they're just minor ornamental changes, reducing the percentage of people who are allowed in malls, for example. While we have finally closed non-essential businesses, it took so long that now the amount of variance in the province and the fact that we have the highest positivity rate in the country and arguably across North America, we have a massive issue here in Manitoba in terms of not even being able to talk about opening up. And when there is any opening up, it'll be just minor, small restrictions that perhaps we could be looking at Father's Day where we could be sitting with our father outside or something like that within our own family. Hearing about these openings, I hope that people learn that the ongoing choice of this right-wing conservative premiership going from Ontario West has led us to paths in which we have to go more and more into lockdown, and that while we may look at the United States, and I think that's what Alberta's doing, is seeing this massive aggressive reopening, people sitting at hockey games, for example, I think is one of the worst possible PR roles for people talking about lockdowns, it's going to be ongoing, that people are going to be wanting to open up, and everybody wants to be the first premier to say we've eradicated the virus or that we've eliminated the virus. That's not going to happen by opening up businesses. It's going to happen by more lockdowns, by more aggressive attempts. And all we have to do is look at First Nations. I mean, many First Nations here in Manitoba are the only places where there are no COVID cases. And it's because of the aggressive lockdowns. People have accepted that their rights have to be controlled. They have to be limited. And the biggest communities, this is what my column is about today in the Winnipeg Free Press, the biggest communities that are fighting those vaccines, saying, we don't have any wishes to have these vaccines, are often Christian, rural, southern communities. Those are the ones where COVID is going the worst.
Okay. Yeah, an interesting point. Just a last point to you, Kady, on the COVID front. This morning, and I spoke with the minister, there's a whole issue of this committee, this advisory committee, recommending that the quarantine hotels be closed. The minister wouldn't say yes or no. She says she's got to consult with the provinces. The public health officials say they wouldn't say yes or no. What do you make of it?
Yeah, it's really interesting because if you read the report and sort of what it was, it isn't so much that they're saying, hey, everything's going so well. Let's close down these quarantine hotels. We don't need them anymore. It's more saying, you know what? This was kind of a noble experiment. It hasn't really worked. There are sort of conflicting timelines. It's not really clear that it's any more effective or more efficient than just having people quarantine at home if that's what needed, because there are all these exceptions. And the timeline doesn't really match up what's required for a proper quarantine. So in that sense, I can kind of understand why the board is advising that, not really working, so perhaps we should pull the plug on it. At the same time, the government is, of course, under pressure from the Prime Minister is under pressure from the premiers to talk about reopening and allowing more travel within Canada. There's also the constant issue of international travel. Are our borders too tight? Are they too loose? Should we, quarantine people further? Should we quarantine them less? What about tourism over the summer? So I don't really blame the health minister for maybe wanting to do a little more consulting and give this one a good think before coming out with a pronouncement on how to proceed further.
Okay, well, the two of you, I want to thank you. We covered a lot today. I want to thank you, and we'll speak again. Stay safe.
You too. Have a good one.
Thank you.